Understood something most therapists miss. I knew that healing doesn't announce itself with trumpets and confetti. It doesn't send you a proclamation saying, "Congratulations, you're fixed now." Real healing is subtle. It's the psychological equivalent of a tree growing. You don't see it happening, but one day you look up and realize, "Holy, when did I become this tall?" Here's what I'm going to prove to you in the next moments. You've healed more than you think, and I'm going to show you exactly how to recognize it. But here's the catch. This isn't one of those feel-good discourses that tells you everything is fine when it's not. This is about something deeper, something I spent my entire life studying, the process I called individuation. The journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from psychological chaos to integration. And if you follow my thought, I'm going to walk you through 7 unmistakable signs that this process has been happening inside you. 7 markers that prove your psyche has been healing, even when your mind thought it was still broken. Because here's the truth, nobody tells you. Your consciousness is always the last one to know. Let's start with what's wrong, what we get completely backwards about this whole thing. Most people think healing is linear. You're broken, you do the work, you get better. A straight line from point A to point B, damage to recovery, wound to scar. But that's not how the psyche works. I knew this. I understood that the human mind isn't a machine you can fix with the right tools. It's more like an ecosystem, complex, layered, full of hidden processes happening beneath the surface. You ever notice how you can't remember exactly when you stopped being afraid of something? Like you were terrified of public speaking for years, and then one day someone asks you to give a presentation, and you just do it without the usual panic, without the anxiety spiral beforehand. When did that change? You can't pinpoint it. It just happened. That's what real healing looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not a moment where angels descend, and you suddenly feel whole. It's quieter than that, sneakier. And here's why this matters. Don't know what healing actually looks like. You'll miss it when it happens to you. You'll keep thinking you're broken long after you've already mended. You'll keep searching for a transformation that already occurred. I see this all the time. People who've done years of therapy, years of inner work, years of sitting with their pain and integrating their shadows, and they still describe themselves as working on it, or still healing, or not there yet. Meanwhile, if you look at their actual life, their actual behavior, their actual relationships, they're completely different people from who they were 5 years ago. The evidence of healing is everywhere, but they can't see it because they're looking for the wrong signs. So, that's what we're going to fix today. I'm going to give you a framework, a way of recognizing the markers of deep psychological healing based on my understanding of how the psyche actually transforms, not how we think it should transform, how it actually does. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see yourself differently. You're going to recognize healing you didn't know had happened. You're going to give yourself credit for growth you've been denying. But first, we need to understand what I meant by healing in the first place. Here's where I broke from everyone else. Here's where it became dangerous. Most therapeutic approaches, most self-help philosophies, most spiritual traditions, they all have the same underlying assumption. Healing means becoming better, becoming good, becoming the idealized version of yourself. Get rid of your anger, eliminate your selfishness, transcend your pettiness. Become pure, become enlightened, become the best version of you. I said, that's not healing. That's repression with a spiritual mask. Because here's what happens when you try to become good. When you try to eliminate all the parts of yourself you judge as bad, or wrong, or unacceptable, you don't get rid of them. You just push them into what I called the shadow, the unconscious realm where all your rejected parts go to live. And the shadow doesn't just sit there quietly. It grows. It gains power. It becomes, in my words, blacker and denser, the more you ignore it. Think about the most judgmental people you know, the ones constantly criticizing others, the ones who seem obsessed with other people's moral failures. What are they really doing? They're projecting their own shadow. They are seeing in others what they can't acknowledge in themselves. The angry person who rails against aggression, the sexually repressed person who's obsessed with other people's sex lives, the greedy person who constantly accuses others of being materialistic. That's the shadow at work. So I proposed something radical. I said you don't heal by becoming good. You heal by becoming whole, by integrating everything, light and dark, good and bad, angel and demon. I wrote, I'd rather be whole than good. Let that sink in for a second. I'd rather be whole than good. That's not a license for misbehavior. It's not a justification for hurting people. It's something deeper. It's the recognition that every human psyche contains contradictions, contains darkness, contains impulses, and desires and qualities we've been taught to reject. And true healing, true psychological health comes from acknowledging all of it, befriending all of it, integrating all of it into conscious awareness. This is what I called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. Now, this process doesn't happen overnight. It's not something you complete and check off your list. It's a lifelong journey, but there are markers along the way, signs that indicate you're moving in the right direction, that the work is happening, and that's what these 7 signs are. They're not achievements. They're not goals to pursue. They're natural byproducts of the individuation process, evidence that your psyche is doing its work. So, let's get into them. Sign number 1, the gift of solitude. Here's the first sign. You've healed more than you realize. Be alone without being lonely. Now I know that sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but pay attention to what's actually happening here, because this is profound. Most people are terrified of being alone. And I don't mean for an hour or two. I mean really alone. No book, no correspondence, no music, just you and your thoughts in a quiet room. Try it sometime. Watch what happens. 5 minutes and your hand reaches for some distraction without you even consciously deciding to. Your mind starts listing all the things you need to do. You suddenly remember letters you need to write, tasks you need to complete, anything to avoid being present with yourself. I understood this. I said we fill our lives with noise and activity specifically to avoid confronting what's inside, because what's inside can be terrifying. All those thoughts we don't want to think, all those feelings we don't want to feel, all those parts of ourselves we've been running from. But here's what changes when you've started to heal. You can sit with yourself. You can be in that quiet room and feel okay. Not ecstatic, not necessarily happy, just okay, peaceful, even content. Why? Because you've done something most people never do. You've met yourself, the real you, not the persona you present to the world, not the idealized version you wish you were, the actual you with all your flaws and fears and weird thoughts and uncomfortable truths. This is shadow work. This is what I meant by making the unconscious conscious. You've looked at the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. The anger, the jealousy, the pettiness, the desire for revenge, the sexual thoughts you're supposed to suppress, the selfish impulses you're supposed to deny, and instead of running from them, you acknowledge them. You said, okay, this is also me. That's integration. That's how the shadow loses its power over you. Because here's the thing about the parts of yourself you reject. They don't go away. They just go underground. They become what I called autonomous complexes, many personalities within your psyche that hijack your behavior when you're not looking. Ever explode at someone over something small and then think, why did I react like that? That's not even like me. That's a complex activating. That's your shadow taking control. But when you've integrated these parts, when you've brought them into consciousness and accepted them as aspects of who you are, they stop controlling you. They become just parts of you. Not good, not bad, just human. And that's when solitude becomes possible, because you're no longer afraid of what you'll find when you're alone with yourself. You've already met those demons. You've already shaken hands with them. They're not strangers anymore. You become your own companion, your own friend. And that's one of the most underrated signs of deep psychological healing. If you can sit in a quiet room with yourself for an hour and feel at peace, you've healed more than you realize. Sign number 2, when the past loses its teeth. Second sign, your old triggers don't trigger you anymore. Let me paint you a picture. There's this thing that used to absolutely wreck you. Maybe it was a certain tone of voice. Maybe it was being criticized. Maybe it was feeling ignored or overlooked. Maybe it was seeing someone succeed where you failed. Whatever it was, when it happened, boom, you'd spiral. Hours, days, sometimes weeks of emotional chaos, rumination, self-doubt, anger, that sick feeling in your stomach that wouldn't go away. It had power over you, complete power. But then something changes, and you don't even notice it at first. That same situation happens. That same trigger presents itself, and you feel something, a little twinge, maybe a brief moment of discomfort, but it doesn't consume you. It doesn't pull you under. You notice it. You observe it. You think, interesting. And then you move on. What the hell happened? I would say you made the unconscious conscious. You brought the buried wound into the light and processed it, integrated it, metabolized it. See, triggers are basically psychic landmines. They buried remnants of unprocessed pain, traumatic or painful experiences that got shoved into the unconscious because they were too overwhelming to deal with at the time, and they stay there hidden until something in your present-day life reminds your psyche of that original wound. Then boom, the mind explodes. You're not responding to what's actually happening now. You're responding to what happened then. This is why our reactions sometimes feel disproportionate to the situation. Your partner forgets to send word back, and you feel this massive wave of abandonment. Your superior gives you feedback, and you feel like you're being attacked. Someone disagrees with you, and you feel like your entire identity is under threat. The present moment triggered a past wound, and the emotional intensity you're feeling, that's from the past, not the present. But here's what's beautiful about healing. As you do the work, as you examine these wounds, as you understand their origins, and feel the feelings you suppressed, something shifts. The landmines get diffused, the old wounds still exist. Healing doesn't erase your history, but they've been integrated. They've been brought from the unconscious into consciousness. They become part of your story, rather than unconscious forces controlling your story. You can look at them now. You can say, oh yeah, that's why I reacted that way. That reminds me of when I was 8, and my father did this or that, touches the same place as when my former spouse said that. You see the connection. You understand the pattern, and in that understanding, in that consciousness, the trigger loses most of its power. It's like the difference between being haunted by a ghost and understanding the history of a house. Same facts, completely different emotional experience. This is huge. This is one of the clearest signs that deep healing has occurred, and a lot of people miss it because they are not paying attention. You stop reacting the way you used to, and instead of celebrating that growth, you barely notice it. It just feels normal. Like, of course I'm not devastated by criticism anymore. I'm an adult. But no, that took work. That took healing. That took your psyche doing long hours of background processing to integrate that wound. Give yourself credit for that. Recognize it as the marker of healing that it is. Because when the past loses its teeth, when your triggers stop triggering you, that's not numbness. That's not denial. That's integration. That's wholeness. Sign number 3, the paradox playground. Third sign, and this is where it gets interesting. You can hold contradictions without losing your mind. Let me ask you something. Can you love someone and also be frustrated by them? Can you be grateful for your life while also acknowledging its difficulties? Can you be confident in your abilities while also recognizing your limitations? If you answered yes, congratulations. You've achieved something most people struggle with their entire lives. You can hold paradox. Western culture hates paradox. We want things to be one way or the other, right or wrong, good or bad, success or failure. You're either confident or insecure, either happy or sad, either healed or broken. We're taught that contradictions need to be resolved, that you need to pick a side, that you need to be consistent. But life doesn't work that way, and the psyche definitely doesn't work that way. I knew this. I talked about what I called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously without collapsing them into a single answer. This is psychological maturity. This is what integration actually looks like. Think about it. You contain multitudes. You're not one thing. You're kind and selfish. You're brave and afraid. You're wise and foolish. You love and you hate. You're strong and vulnerable. You're confident and uncertain. All of these exist in you at the same time. And when you've healed significantly, you can acknowledge this without it breaking your brain. You don't need to resolve the contradiction. You don't need to be one thing. You don't need the world to make simple binary sense. This connects directly to what we talked about earlier with the shadow. Because the shadow is basically everything you've rejected because it contradicts your ego's idea of who you are. You want to see yourself as a good person, so you reject your selfishness. You want to see yourself as strong, so you reject your vulnerability. You want to see yourself as rational, so you reject your emotions. But healing means bringing these rejected parts back into consciousness, admitting they exist, acknowledging that you're complex, contradictory human.
And here's what's wild.
When you can do this, when you can hold paradox, you become more authentic, not less, because you're not pretending anymore. You're not maintaining this exhausting facade of consistency. You're just being who you actually are, which includes contradictions. You can admit, yes, I love my work, and I also resent it sometimes. Both true. I'm grateful for my partner, and I also get annoyed by them. Both true. I'm proud of my accomplishments, and I also feel like I haven't done enough. Both true. The need to pick one side, to be consistent, to always have the right answer. These rigid requirements start to soften, and this is liberating. It's like your psyche takes a deep breath and says, "Oh, thank God, I don't have to pretend anymore." This relates to what scholars of Carl Rogers and personal development often discuss about congruence and authenticity. While Rogers approached it from a different angle than I, both understood that psychological health involves integrating all aspects of the self, rather than rejecting parts that don't fit an ideal self-concept. I call this the union of opposites. It's the recognition that transformation happens not by eliminating one side of a polarity, but by holding both in creative tension, light and dark, strength and weakness, joy and sorrow, success and failure. You need both. You are both. And when you can accept that, when you can live in that tension without needing to resolve it, you've achieved something profound. If you find yourself able to hold contradictions that used to tear you apart, that's a sign. That's evidence of deep healing. That's your psyche telling you that you've integrated more than you realize. Sign number 4, projection immunity. Fourth sign, other people's projections don't stick to you anymore. This one's subtle but powerful. So, let's break it down. First, what is projection in Jungian psychology? Projection is when you see in others what you can't see in yourself. When you haven't integrated a part of your own psyche, you project it outward. You see it in other people, and then you react strongly to what you see. The person who's terrified of their own anger sees everyone else as aggressive. The person who can't acknowledge their own neediness sees everyone else as clingy. The person who's running from their own sadness sees everyone else as depressed and tries to fix them. You're not seeing the other person clearly. You're seeing your own shadow reflected back at you. But here's the thing. Projection works both ways. Other people are constantly projecting onto you too. They're seeing in you qualities that belong to their psyche, not yours. They're expecting you to play roles that come from their history, not your reality. They're attributing to you motivations, feelings, and characteristics that are actually their own unconscious material. And when you haven't healed, when you haven't differentiated your own psyche enough, you absorb these projections. You take them as truth about yourself. Someone treats you like an authority figure. Even though you're peers, you start acting like an authority figure. Someone expects you to be weak or needy. You start feeling weak and needy. Someone projects their anger onto you. You start questioning if you are actually an angry person. You become what others project onto you, because you don't have a strong enough sense of who you actually are. But here's what changes with healing. You develop what I call projection immunity, not complete imperiousness. You're still human, but a sturdy capacity to recognize when someone is projecting onto you, rather than seeing you clearly. Let me give you an example. Say you're in a discussion and someone gets defensive when you ask a simple question. They respond as if you've attacked them, as if you have some hidden agenda. In the past, you might have absorbed that. You might have thought, "Oh my God, was I aggressive? Did I say it wrong? Am I being hostile?" Without realizing it, you take on their projection and start questioning yourself. But when you've healed, when you know yourself better, you can recognize it for what it is. You can think interesting. That's their interpretation, not my intention. They're responding to something in their own psyche, not to what I actually said. You can have compassion for their reaction without taking responsibility for their projection. This is huge. This is what creates healthy boundaries, because boundaries aren't about building walls or keeping people out. Boundaries are about knowing where you end and another person begins. What's yours and what's theirs. When you can distinguish between accurate feedback and projection, you can make a more accurate assessment of the situation. Between what truly belongs to you and what someone else is trying to place on you, you've achieved clarity most people never reach. You know yourself well enough to say, "Nope, that's not mine." When someone tries to hand you their shadow, and this doesn't make you callous or disconnected, you can still have empathy. You can still be open to feedback, but you're not a sponge anymore. You're not absorbing everyone's unconscious material and carrying it around like it's yours. You've differentiated. You've individuated enough to know yourself distinctly from others. If you find yourself less affected by other people's judgments, less likely to absorb their projections, less inclined to shape yourself according to their expectations, that's not coldness, that's not arrogance, that's healing. That's you knowing yourself well enough to distinguish between what's real and what's projected. Sign number 5, the dream shift. Fifth sign, your dreams have changed. Now, some of you might be thinking, "I don't remember my dreams," or "I don't pay attention to dreams." And that's fine. This sign might not apply to you specifically, but for those who do engage with their dream life, this is one of the most telling markers of deep psychological transformation. I view dreams as direct communications from the unconscious, messages from the parts of yourself that don't speak in words or logic. The dream world reveals the current state of your psyche, what's happening beneath conscious awareness. Day in when you're in states of significant psychological distress or fragmentation, dreams reflect that chaos. You might have nightmares, recurring dreams where you're being chased or trapped, dreams where you can't speak or can't move, dreams of falling, drowning, being lost, dreams that leave you shaken and anxious when you wake up. These aren't random. These are your unconscious mind trying to process overwhelming material trauma, conflict, unintegrated experiences, parts of yourself that are in distress. The unconscious is basically screaming, "Hey, something's wrong down here. Pay attention." But as healing progresses, as you do the work of integration, as you make the unconscious conscious, dreams transform. They don't necessarily become pleasant. The unconscious still has work to do.